I would like to know about you, what you do. I wanted to know more about, what you do at your work and
Okay.
what is UX design for you. Know how people work in the industry, what work goes on. And as a UX designer, 10 years down the line, what am I expecting? Much say or how much freedom do we have? My another question was on finding users.
Hi, Khushi.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Sorry for joining in late though.
Oh, no, that's all right.
We have this thing going on. It's a 8-day festival.
I know about Paryushan, right? All right.
Yes.
Tell me, Khushi, tell me something about
So,
yourself.
I am third year design student, UX design at MIT ADT.
Okay.
That's in Pune. And I'm studying UX design, and exploring, getting to know people in the industry, what they're doing, what I'd like to do when I get there.
Okay. What do you like to do?
So I want so far I have been more towards research than
Okay.
UI. In
Okay.
terms of UX, I would like to do more research, more user interviews, all of that.
A very important part of the UX thing is research. Indeed. Very
Hmm.
interesting and very challenging as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would like to know about you, what you do.
Me. Oh, interesting. Well, I'm basically an architect by qualification. So I practiced architecture for some time. I got into 3D animation. Then I got into graphic designing, and then eventually I got into user experience designing. So for the last
Hmm.
13 plus years, I'm doing UX design.
Wow.
I saw your profile. You
So,
are a co-founder with ARC.
hmm,
Yeah, what's that?
yes. So, a friend of mine had reached out. He wanted to start a business development agency. So he wanted a logo done, and I was like, sure, I can help you with that. And then he asked me if I could lead the design team for that. And then later, so he wanted a co-founder to run it with, and that is how he thought, like, it would be a good fit. So we started working on this. It's been like we started it this March, and like if it were something related to design, that's something I'm aware about. But understanding the business development sector,
Mm-hmm.
how it goes, so that's taking a little time, and then also college at the same time. So the growth is very slow right now,
Yeah, but it's
but
interesting that you are in your college, but you are already setting your foot in the design industry, and that to starting out as an entrepreneur. If you're a co-founder, I would consider you to be an entrepreneur.
hmm,
So that's interesting.
yes,
All right. Okay. Tell me how
we
can.
we do have a team of 10.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I did check
So a
check.
lot of things to learn from there as well.
Absolutely. I'm still learning. So tell me how can I help you?
Um, I wanted to know more about, what you do at your work and
Okay.
what is UX design for you.
Okay. So yeah, I do end-to-end UX design. So that would involve user research. It would involve interaction design. It would involve user testing. So from start to end. But obviously, I work for an organization which is into service delivery. Depending on the
Hmm.
project, I might be a dedicated user researcher. I could be an hybrid resource who's doing both research and design, or I could just be doing design. So yeah, or I could be leading a
Hmm.
project when we work within the organization that I'm part of. So it's usually a big engagement. So there's a lot of digital
Hmm.
transformation and strategy work also required. Cognizant is more into design and development. I focus on the design bit of it, and there are other team members
Hmm.
who would focus on the development bit of it. So generally, uh, we
Hmm.
usually start a project and get into trying to understand what the business ask is. We try to understand what the ecosystem of the business is, how are they structured, what is the objective of the business to start with, but also what is the objective of that particular
Hmm.
project. So you might have a high level business objective, but you might have a very focused approach towards what you need to do get done in your design. So like let me ask you a question before I continue.
Mhm.
So what do you
Please.
aim to learn in this
Mhm.
process? What is it that you're looking to learn?
Um, I'm looking to learn. So I don't know a lot of. So in my family, not a lot of people are professionals in the industry. They're like business owners. This. So I wanted to know how people work in the industry, what work goes on, and as a UX designer, 10 years down the line, what am I expecting?
Right, 10 years down the line. Okay, let's come to that. But let me explain. So I've had an opportunity to work with two top of the industry multinational companies, TCS and Cognizant. Um, I'm not sure how things work in other organizations, but definitely I can let you know how things work in an organization like TCS or Cognizant. Um,
Hmm.
so as I mentioned, so usually there is a project, and a team is assembled for a project. A project could be as short as 2 months, 3 months, but it could also be as long as 2 years, 3 years. So that depends on how
Hmm.
big the account is, how big the requirement is. And typically, on a typical project, let's say I'm leading the project, so I might have a set of UX designers, user researchers, interaction designers
Hmm.
part of my team, or I could be a single or a pair of designers working on a project. So we have full range of work over there. And once we start a project, there is usually a project kickoff where the project
Hmm.
manager would introduce the team, all the stakeholders that are part of the team. I think it's important for a designer to know who the stakeholders are, whether they are the
Hmm.
business stakeholders, whether they are the technical stakeholders like solution architects, testing team, development team. So it's important to know who's part of the team that you're going to work with. Every
Hmm.
project could be different, so you might be working with a new team in a new project going forward. That's unlike if you are
Hmm.
in a product company. You usually might have the same set of members that you're working on, but if you're in a
Hmm.
service in a delivery company like Cognizant, you would have different teams. So you have your project kickoff where the client will typically give you an understanding of what the project requirement is. This is what we hope to achieve, aim to achieve. They set down some governance rules. How do we conduct our business together? How do we interact with each other? What are the general
Hmm.
engagement rules? So that kind of stuff would be set up. But then essentially at this point, the UX designer typically takes lead from a
Hmm.
design perspective. There will be a solution architect who would be leading from a technical aspect. What is the technology stack that we are going to work with, and what are the different parameters within which business requirements are. So essentially, this is conducted as a series of workshops. So once you have an understanding of who the stakeholders are, you know who to involve in in the conversation. And the job of
Hmm.
a UX designer, to be very honest, at the onset is all about asking questions before you even draw a single line
Hmm.
of your design. You do a major part, especially since you're interested in getting into user research. Asking questions
Yeah.
is primarily what you do, right? Understand
Hmm.
what the user requirements are, what the business objectives are, and basically come to a point where you have a clarity as to what
Hmm.
is what and what needs to be done, right? So to reach that clarity is what a user researcher basically does a lot of pre pre-design activities, right?
Hmm.
So we do set up these workshops, and as a part of a workshop, you might have conversations with different stakeholders, business stakeholders. So typically in a project, you would have a product owner which is usually appointed by the client, right? So the product owner is
Hmm.
responsible for that particular project. I'm not calling him a project owner. Usually, you're designing a product, a software product. So there is one person from the
Hmm.
client side who's responsible for it. And so the product owner is a key member. Then we have got business analysts. So business analyst typically is from the clients, from the from the company, from our company. So they will assist us in analyzing what the business requirements are. But you also have who are known as subject matter experts, right? Subject matter expert basically are people from that industry, right? So for example, you could be designing for a finance company, banking and finance company, or you could be doing a design for an industrial manufacturer. So because these are different domains, and you as a UX designer, you are obviously not, you don't know everything about anything about everything, kind of thing, right? You know your stuff, you know design, but you don't know, you might not know the technology, you might not know a specific domain that you are designing for. So you have these subject matter experts whose job is to basically guide you in terms of what are the constraints and ways of working for that particular domain, right? Let's say you are designing a software for a trading company, then you need to know, the ins and out of the trading industry. So you have these SMEs who would help you on that. And then there are other solution architects and testing and development team members as well, but they will come later down into the picture. So once you have these conversations, workshops as we call them, so these are like long conversations of 2 hours, 3 hours, on a daily basis, and the aim is to elicit or get more information out from the client as to what is it that they want, to clarify the requirement essentially. And once you have a certain direction, this is what the client is looking for, this is how the client ecosystem is, this is what their objectives are, then you would want to start focusing on, oh, this is the ask of the project, how do I who are the users, who are the users who are going to use that product of yours. So you might want to understand the pros and cons, the pain points, the behaviors, the motivations of these users, right? So you would usually start out by trying to identify who are these users. We call we first define user groups in terms of identifying, these are the top level groups, top level set of people with whom we need to interact with, and ask questions and understand their behavior and stuff like that. And within the user group also there will be subdivision. There would be different criteria, like we call them as user characteristics. So you could have, you might want to talk to a user who is like 10 years experienced, and at the same time you might want to talk to somebody who's just joined the industry, 1 or 2 years in the industry. So you basically get a different perspective from people with different experience. You might want to talk to people with different genders, depending on the product. If gender plays a role, how does a female operator might think differently from a male operator, as an example. You might want to talk to a person who is highly qualified as against a person who has just completed basic education. So the idea is to look at these user groups from different perspectives. You might want to talk to people who are let's say differently challenged, abled, like they might have some challenges, some physical or mental challenges. So accessibility plays a very important role in design. So trying to understand their point of view, how they would do something differently. For example, if they have issues comprehending complex thoughts, complex ideas, if they are neurodivergent, for example, or they might have some motor skill issues, how would they do the same thing that a person without those issues, how would they generally do it? So the idea is to identify these different characteristics. Then we get these users. Usually the users are provided by the business, the client team. So they will coordinate and help arrange these users for us based on the criteria that we define as designers. Then you would, as a user researcher, this is where most of the user research work typically falls in. So you would go through a planning phase where you would want to elaborate what is it that you are going to test the user with, or what is it that you're going to research. Let's say testing might come later down the line, but you might want to research something before you even start designing anything, right? So you might want to plan, right? What is the objective of your testing? What is the aim of your testing, right? You might maybe initially the aim might be to understand the user primarily. Who is the user? What is the um, what is the environment within which he works? What are the constraints within which he has to work? How does he actually get his work done? Um, what kind of pain points does he experience while he's doing his role, while he's conducting his activities? So so planning becomes an important phase, and to be very honest, a user researcher's role is very important, from the sense that not only are they driving the entire the UX thing, they are doing the foundational work on which rest of the design happens. One of the very important principles is evidence-based design or data-driven design. So which means that you should not assume things about what your user would be doing or might be doing, and then user research becomes a way of actually validating. If you do have any hypothesis, this is what we think the user would normally do. Instead of having that hypothesis, you would do user research to validate those hypotheses. So one part of planning would be writing down what your understanding or what your assumptions about the users are, and then validating that through an actual user research, right? So once you plan your user research, you would even plan stuff like how much time would you take for planning, right? So you might spend a week to plan out the whole thing, but you might also need some time to recruit these users, right? Users are not available in hand, right? They are busy with their work. Somebody will have to go and coordinate with them, arrange timings to have those conversations with them. So you might want to recruit these users. A lot of times you might have to go through different channels for recruitment. A client might have their own panel of users through whom you could do the research, or you might want to access users through some public organization or a public body. Let's say I'm doing a research with let's say railway operators, right? Now these railway operators may be part of some public organization that they typically are a part of. You could approach these public organizations and to say that we would like to conduct this research. We would need access to people like with this characteristic. So there is a recruitment phase within which we identify people. A lot of times the client helps you arrange these users primarily, but it's a joint activity. You would be having that conversation with the users, and once you do your planning phase, you would then design the user research. And when I say design, it would basically focus on what are the different things that you would want to find out from the user. So you start making note of these things. Now, why would you want to make a note of these things? Because you might tend to forget things when you actually conduct research, right? So it's better to put it down on paper, what is in your mind. And I'm sure you must be aware that there are these collaboration tools available in the market today. You have got tools like Miro or Lucid Spark or FigJam. So these tools are very essential. It's an essential part of a UX designer, especially a user researcher, where you put whatever thoughts that you have, whatever is your understanding of your business requirement, of the client, of the user, anything, you just start putting it onto that board. And the reason you do that is because you are working with a team, right? So once you work with a team, you want to ensure everybody's on the same page, right? It's not that you have a different understanding of the user and the client has a different understanding of the user. So you might want that to happen. I'll take a brief pause here because obviously it's a big process to cover. But do you have any questions on what I just spoke about, the initial foundational work before the actual UX work starts?
Hmm. So my first question is, how much say or how much freedom do we have as a like,
Good question.
you our work is foundational and we ask questions, but we heard
Sorry, there was an audio break.
because sometimes we okay
S-
yes.
yeah,
So my
could you
question
repeat
is,
the last line? Yeah.
um that we like you said important designers are functional, but how often are we heard? Because the question is that do we have the freedom like of freedom
So, uh,
like actually
well, definitely you have the freedom, and sometimes, depending on the project that you are working on, there could be some constraints. Like I remember, I had worked on a defense project, and the defense project was so classified that we were only working on one subsection of the entire project, and you know they do security through obscurity or through compartmentalization. So this team doesn't know what the other team is working on. So sometimes you are restricted by that. Sometimes you might be working where the user himself is not available. For example, you might be working where let's say it's like a project that I'm currently working on is in the agriculture domain, and at this point of time it is harvest season. So it's very difficult to go and ask a farmer to give me 1 hour of your time so that I can talk to you. He's busy from start of the day to the end of the day. So a lot of times you may have that those constraints, but usually the especially in an organization that is mature, UX where the UX maturity level is high, they understand the value of user research, and for that reason they give you that flexibility to interact with the user, to ask the right set of questions. Yeah, so you do get that flexibility.
what are some companies that are that have high UX?
Yeah, I mean the company I'm working in is, so there are definitely companies. So there are different levels of UX maturity. So like level 1 to 5, and obviously the level of like the maturity level is defined based on how robust the UX process is, how well the awareness is within the organization on the importance of UX. So a lot of like at a very low level, people might not just be aware of the importance of UX design. They might directly jump into development, or maybe they might jump into design without doing any research. And at the top level of UX maturity, no amount of design work is done until you do research on every aspect of it. So, for example, in UK where I'm currently working, uh, all the government projects they have a very rigorous UCD process through which things have to pass to kind of conduct before you even start designing your screens. So they have different levels of, how do I put, like they have an alpha phase when the initial discovery happens, then they have a beta phase when the concepts and prototypes are designed, then they have an they have an alpha phase when that happens, then there is a beta phase when those designs are tested with users, and then more elaboration of the design happens. So usually these projects are long durations because they spend time on research as well. Yeah, so and there is a lot of demand for especially for user researchers in public sector.
Hmm. That is great. My another question was on finding users. So at college level projects, we usually pick up a domain that is more easily accessible. Okay, this one time we were working on Ola drivers, and there are it's very easily accessible if you were to go do research outside.
Yeah.
So this has worked fine so far, but this one time I had a client, and he was UAE based. It was a food distribution company, and to redesign their website, to understand what was going wrong with the website, and to I would want to know user.
Yeah.
Because outside, like how do I connect with the users there?
Okay, so very interesting because the link that I shared with you earlier, that one specifically focuses on how to
Hmm.
connect with users,
Connect
and
with
it's a standard question that almost any aspiring UX designer has a problem with, and they want to answer. So definitely go back and look at that video. But let me try and
Hmm.
address that one briefly over here. Generally, when you work on a project for a client, the client is invested in ensuring that you design or you prepare a good product, you come up with a good product, right? Because they're spending money,
Hmm.
so they are invested in it. And they,
Hmm.
for most part, the client would provide you support in identifying users, in recruiting users, as I mentioned earlier, right?
Hmm.
As a user researcher, you would define what kind of users you want to talk to, but
Hmm.
um, you would get that recruitment support from the client a lot, because they
Hmm.
usually engage with their users, so they know, they either have a database of users or they know the right people to get in touch with, so that you can talk to the right
Hmm.
people. Sometimes, depending on the sensitivity of the project, as I mentioned earlier, if it's a defense project, or for example, if it's a project where, like, you need to talk to high net worth individuals, right? People who
Hmm.
are dealing in millions, and millions of, say, pounds or dollars, right? So
Hmm.
these people are extremely busy, their time is very valuable. So at these kind of times, again, there could be some challenges getting access to them, and you might have to show a lot
Hmm.
of sensitivity in when you ask questions, right? Because these people are very extremely busy. But
Hmm.
again, as I said, you do get access to these users. Sometimes, if you don't get access to these users,
Hmm.
then you might have to rely on some amount of pseudo research. So you might
Hmm.
have to depend on talking to a subject matter expert who has worked in that industry for, say,
Hmm.
20 years, and who knows the ins and out of the uh, of how that particular work is done. That is not ideal
Hmm.
scenario, but in case you don't get access to the real users, then that is a kind of a fallback. Another thing that we do as a part
Hmm.
of user research is desk research. You might do a lot of desk research
Hmm.
before you even go and connect with users, right? Because it sort of prepares you for that industry and the domain that you are getting into. It gives you a lot of background
Right.
information that you need to know before you know what kind of questions to ask, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So getting access to user is challenging, but yeah, you have to take it as it comes.
Okay, yes. It cleared. The doubt has cleared.
Yeah.
Another question, it's not a question per se, it's like a situation where,
Mm-hmm.
you know, some place like Cognizant, they understand UX maturity.
Mm-hmm.
But have been facing troubles on making people understand that the research is also important. When people come to me for projects, they want their website done, and then this is the breakdown that I give them.
Yeah.
So they're like, I don't want all of this. I just want the website. I
Yeah.
just want the redesign part.
That's where.
So
Yeah.
it's very difficult to
Sorry. Go ahead.
explain.
Yeah.
Yes,
No,
that
indeed,
was it.
indeed. It is a challenge, and that's where we talk about UX maturity. Usually, if
Hmm.
we come across a scenario where we are interacting with an client or an organization where the UX maturity level is, say, not high, then we usually go through a phase of evangelization, as it is called, basically advocating why UX, right? So you
Hmm.
might do a presentation to key stakeholders, right? A lot of times,
Hmm.
um, UX is not built into the culture, and culture has to come from top down. If their managers and the managers and the CEO is not invested in it, then
Hmm.
usually they would, the people at the lower level, they say, if the company is not interested in, why should I worry so much about it, right?
Right.
So you could approach
Hmm.
higher stakeholder, higher management, and sort of
Hmm.
communicate the importance of UX. There is this
Hmm.
concept of return on investment. So you could
Right.
you could communicate to these key stakeholders that, give them examples of what might have happened in the past. Let's say somebody
Hmm.
spent a $500,000 to develop a product, and brought it to the market without doing any research, and then if that project fails, then all that money is lost, and then you might want to go back and do a lot of rework. So rework obviously takes more time to fix existing defects. It's much easier to spend money to do some research at the onset, spend money during the design phase or the definition phase.
Mm.
A lot of times even the problem statement is not known to the client. The client doesn't know the
Mm.
problem. They say, I want, like, as you rightly mentioned, they say, I want you to bring me this website and it should look like that other
Mm.
website that I have seen, right?
Mm.
They don't even know the problem statement that they want to address or they want to resolve. And this
Yes.
lack of knowledge would turn out that you might go and build something that is nice, shiny, and looks all good, but then again it does not serve the bottom line. The bottom line mean either they want to increase their sales, or they want to increase the number of
Mm.
customers, or whatever is their bottom line, right? Usually it is increasing the profit.
Mm.
So if it does not
Right.
impact, so if you can show to the stakeholder the relationship between taking a wrong design decision, a wrong business decision,
Mm.
then corresponding a wrong design decision or a wrong development decision, and if you can showcase to them that that might impact their bottom line, which every
Mm.
client is sensitive to, their profit margins. If you can bring that relationship, show it to them, they will understand that value of conducting user research.
Mm. Right.
Yeah,
Speaking their language instead of ours.
speaking in their language. Yeah, and then
Mm.
it still may not be that you make a presentation and they understand. It may not happen,
Mm.
right? So sometimes it's a journey. Let's assume that you
Right.
build a relationship with the client. Like, it's not just one project you want to do and get away. So then you might
Mm.
start off by trying to do some lean UX, right? Saying that, okay, if you cannot do a full-fledged discovery phase, can we at least do have a quick chat with a couple of experienced stakeholders
Mm.
from your own business, right? Um,
Mm.
and then, or okay, let me tell you one thing. So one thing that we always do,
Mm.
and that helps the client understand the value of UX. Assuming that you get an
Mm.
opportunity to conduct user research, let's say, maybe not the kind of research you are interested in, but at least go and talk to these 2 users. I cannot give you the
Mm.
flexibility of talking to 12 users. Go and talk to these 3 users, right? Let's say
Mm.
that limited approach is what you have got. Even in that
Mm.
scenario, we always make it a point to include the client stakeholders during the research phase. So
Mm.
usually nowadays we have these conversations over Teams and Zoom call, right? So what we insist on, the marketing team, the legal team, the business team, whichever team the client has, we insist them to have 1 or 2 representative to be part of that UX interview, right, as
Mm.
observers. And they have very very clearly defined rules. You are not supposed to talk to the users. You are
Mm.
supposed to stay in the background and listen to what we ask to the users and what the users answer, right? And
Mm.
we do give them an opportunity at the end of the session, if they have any questions, unanswered questions, they might want to ask the user themselves. But
Mm.
every time we have conducted these sessions, these kind of sessions with client stakeholders as observers, the client has come back to us saying that these sessions have opened their eyes, in the sense that what they thought the user wanted was not what the user
Mm.
actually said or what the user actually did,
Okay.
right? So the best
Mm.
way to like, if you want to get your foot in, obviously you need to get 1 or 2 user research conducted, but make it a
Mm.
point to involve the client stakeholder into that conversation.
Mm.
And that,
Yes.
no amount of asking the user, sorry, telling the stakeholder what they want, or like how useful a UX
Mm.
is or user research is going to help better than if they themselves are part of the conversation and they see, oh, this is not what I thought the user wanted, right?
Mm.
So a live example, I did a project for UK government very recently, where
Mm.
we had to develop an application within a very short period of time, and and the application was about a potential epidemic. Okay,
Hmm.
potential. But the client was very worried about talking to the users, because this is not like this is like a potential thing, right? We don't want to spread panic uh, even before the epidemic sets in. We don't want to set the
Correct.
panic with the users, right? So the client was so worried, and that they said that we understand UX is important, but we would like you not to talk to these users. We don't want you to
Hmm.
talk to these users because we are worried about the reputation risk to the reputation of the organization, and the panic it might
Right.
set in the public. we
Hmm.
we still insisted that at least, if not 10 people, can we talk to 2 people, can we have some conversation, and we included
Hmm.
them in those conversations. And after those conversations were over, they came back and they said, oh, this is not what we thought the users
Hmm.
had problems with. And they literally saw the value in how we what we designed eventually in that thing. So I have a live
Hmm.
example also for that. Yeah.
That is great.
Yeah,
Does UK government invest a lot in terms of design and research?
absolutely, absolutely, they do.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yes. So, what were the next phases after planning?
So let's say you're done with your planning stage, you're done with your recruitment phase, so and also your designing phase. One of the key parts of your designing
Hmm.
phase is identifying what you're going to test for, like what is the objective, what you're going to test. So I'm going to test um, how does the user get his work done, what does he do in an exception scenario. So think about the happy path, think about alternate scenarios, not
Hmm.
the regular or not the happy path as we call it. Think about try to come up with those edge case scenarios which matter to the user, and document
Hmm.
these are the 5 things or these are the 10 things that we want to validate with the user. Then come up with what we call as a
Hmm.
discussion guide. Create a discussion guide, which is basically a kind of a
Hmm.
script. And the script basically helps you as a user researcher to you know to put in a certain order or a certain sequence the
Hmm.
kind of questions you want to ask the user, right? You might have let's say 10 questions already, or 5 hypotheses with you ready. You might, or for those 5 hypotheses you might have 20 questions with you. But when you
Hmm.
actually start talking to the users, when you look at those 20 questions, you sort of tend to lose track, and you might miss some important validation to do or some question to ask. So by creating a
Hmm.
script, it sort of sets the flow of the conversation that you would like to take. And since you're
Hmm.
learning or you're keen on user research, I'm sure you are aware that these questions that you will be asking should always be open questions. They should not be leading questions. Like, you should not be
Hmm.
asking them, do you like to do this in a particular way? So that becomes a leading
Hmm.
question. And what you should be asking is, in what way would you like to do this thing, right? So you
Right.
should not
Right.
be leading them towards one solution or the other,
Hmm.
right? So you have to have these open questions. And usually when the user answers and tells you something, then there is always another set of question that might come up based on what answer the user, what is feedback the user has given you. So you cannot predict, you cannot predefine all the questions, but what you
Hmm.
can predefine
Right.
is the general direction of your conversation, right? And that's why the script
Hmm.
becomes important, so that you don't lose track of what is important, right? So
Hmm.
now that you have your script ready, and usually then the script will also involve things like introduction, ice breaking, setting the context, right? You don't directly jump into a user interview, right? You set a context for the user, why you are conducting this research, what are you going to ask that user, make him feel comfortable. Don't make him feel nervous, because he might feel nervous, what kind of questions are they going to ask me. So you need to be aware of that. As I mentioned, that your design guide would have those sections. So you would have an introduction and an icebreaker,
Hmm.
sort of setting the context about what is going to happen. A very important part of the actual, before you even actually conduct the user research, is getting consent from the users. So GDPR is a very important concept in UK at least, and Europe, where you have to ensure that you advise the user on his privacy rights, whether you will be recording the session, whether you would be how do I say, capturing any personal details and stuff like that. So getting consent from the user for conducting the user research is also important, needs to be done. And once you have that, you have your session. Obviously, I don't have to tell you how a session is conducted, but you basically ask the set of questions, get answers to your question, basically to validate your hypothesis. Once your sessions are completed, you sort of usually during the part of your user research there are these observers, but you also have a note taker. So you have a third person who would assist you in capturing notes. So that way, as a user researcher, you can focus on asking questions and focus on the answers, and what is the next question you want to ask. So there will be a third person who would be basically capturing all the information, the question that you asked, the answer that the user made, maybe putting it down onto a notepad or onto a Miro board, right? So after your sessions are completed, you go through these notes that are captured. I'm sure you are aware of this term called affinity mapping. So you basically have a lot
Yes.
of data that you have captured. So like let's say you have got hundreds of sticky notes, right? And each sticky is capturing one point that the user mentioned. It might be a quote that the user said. It might be a problem, a pain point that he faces. It might be an interaction that he does. It might be an experience that he feels. It might be anything. So all that data that you capture, you then go through through a synthesis phase, right, where you analyze the data to understand. Like for example, you might talk to 10 users, and many like out of the 10 things that the users tell you, 7 or 8 things might be common, right? It might be the same thing, but there might be 2 or 3 things that might be different for each user. So you would want to do that analysis. What is the common bit, what is the extra bit that somebody mentioned, and even within one user also, he might say things, and one thing that he mentioned earlier and another thing that he mentioned later might relate to each other. So these relationship between different points that the user discusses with you, you might want to do an analysis of that using affinity mapping. And at the end of that data synthesis or affinity mapping exercise, what you have is a set of insights. This is what you understand about the user, right? And these insights are derived from actually talking to the users, not based on any assumptions, right? You would also have validated hypothesis, like something that was an assumption earlier is now validated, right? So you have those understanding. Now these insights then becomes your input for making recommendations. So you might have an insight that says, people have a trouble finding certain information on the website, right? Let's say that's an insight. So your recommendation would then be in sort of defining the information architecture in such a way that it helps findability, right? So obviously every project is unique. So your insights are going to be different for each project, but these insights are then going to drive the recommendations, and you would then take these recommendations to the product owner. Product owner is the person from the client side who is responsible for the product. He would then come up and say, fine, I can see that you have got these 20 recommendations, but we have only so much budget, and this is our business ask. So maybe what we'll do is we'll go through a process of prioritization, right? And when we do prioritization, this is where they will then technically they will do some evaluation. What is the impact of which of these recommendations would have the highest business impact, or which of these recommendation would cost me a lot more to develop, which ones are low hanging fruit, I can do this quickly, right? So it's not in like all the recommendations are built or followed, right? So the product owner has to practically think in terms of, I only have a budget of $500,000, but all these recommendations might take me $2 million of work. I cannot do all that. So let me prioritize and see what is the high impact, low effort kind of recommendations. So that's what they will focus on at the start. So this is a prioritization phase, very important, done immediately after user research. Typically this is done at regular intervals, but definitely after user research. And then I don't know if you've heard of the term called Moscow. So Moscow is basically MOSCOW, but MO stands for most. So it is must have, should have, could have, and would have. MSCW. So then they have created a word called Moscow. So that is a prioritization technique where they say, is this recommendation a must have? Do I need to? I have to do this? Is it a should have, which means like this is really, really, really nice that we should be having it? Is it a could have? You know, if you do it, it's good. If you don't do it, also it's fine. And then there is a would have. You know, I would have done this, but you know, I don't have budget. I don't have this and stuff like that. So those are the ones that lowest impact or lowest severity kind of a thing. So we use this technique called Moscow to prioritize which recommendation needs to be taken forward. So by this stage, you have done research, you have collected data, you have a set of insights. You would then go ahead and start building a persona of the users that you have spoken to. Remember, up till that point, you just had a user profile, a profile that you thought or the business thought, these are the people I should be talking to, correct? But once you actually talk to the user, now you know their day to day, how do they do their work, what are their regular pain points, what are their behaviors. Now you have a better idea about who this user is. This is when a persona is generated. A lot of times people come up with their own personas without doing any research, right? So we call them as pseudo persona. But a pseudo persona does not is just a tick checkbox that I have a persona, but it does not solve any purpose, right? The real purpose of a persona is it's a true representation. Sorry, it's a representation of a true user, not your understanding or your assumption about the user, right? So if you don't have a persona, and it is still better to have a pseudo persona if you don't have a persona at all. But the right thing to do is to have a persona, a true persona. And then a lot of people, what they do is they just create a persona. They have tick marked this step in the UCD process and they move ahead. But that's not the intent of creating a persona. The intent of creating a persona is you are one person within a big team. You know, our project teams are sometimes as small as 10 people, but sometimes as big as 150 people in one project. How do we ensure that, you know, all these different people have got the same idea? Like as a UX designer, you would empathize with the user, but what about the developer? What about the business analyst? How would he empathize with the user? So this persona is the modus operandi, right? Is the mechanism by which we, like for example, if you now let's say we are moving to a stage where we are into defining the problem statements, doing task analysis, doing information architecture, and even further down the line getting into actual interaction design. So when you're doing that, instead of saying, you know, why did you have this action bar at the bottom, why did you have this functionality here, instead of saying this is because the user would want to do something, you know, you would say this is because John, when John opens the website and he wants to find this information. So when you talk about John now, you know, you are now you're making concrete and abstract thought from a user to a real person. Now who is John? John is that persona that you had created. Or who is Khushi, for example, right? She is another persona that you have created. So moment you give that persona a name, you know, the problem statement becomes real. It's not that you are talking about an unambiguous user somewhere sitting somewhere across in a different city, but you are talking about a person that you had interacted with, and then people tend to take, you know, it's a technique. You don't have to do it. It's a technique, but when you name a persona, you name him close to the role that you have. So, for example, if he's a news reporter, I might call him Newton, right? So that Newton in his name, that new in his name might relate to the news part of the news reporter, right? So that way, if you have got a lot of user profiles, you know, I would have like let's try to come up with an example. Let's say there's a data entry operator, and I might call him something starting with a D and having those same syllables in it. So I don't have to think hard about that user,
Right.
right? So that's one technique we usually follow. So build a persona, but then use that persona in your conversation. And if you don't do that, then the persona is just a tick mark in your UCD process. You're not utilizing that information that you have generated. So let's say you created your persona. I think the next step would typically be to build the user journey, a user journey map about
Yeah.
about that particular process. Typically, user journey mapping can also happen before research, but that would be an as is user journey, or it could be our understanding or our hypothesis about what the user journey is. But once you have spoken to the user, you can now go back, revisit that user journey, elaborate on it. This is what we discovered during our conversation. At this point of time, this is what the user does. So you can refine your user journey map. Again, user journey maps, people again think of it as a deliverable. Just create something and present it. Usually in competitions and stuff, it becomes a deliverable. This is a user journey, and they will come up with a nice fancy user journey. User journey is a living document. We literally come back to that user journey at regular intervals and say, oh, this is what we thought the user is doing. Are we doing our design right? Do we need to go back and do some research at this point of journey and update that user journey, all right? And then there are two types. There is as is, what is the journey right now, and then there is a to be journey. To be as in, once you design your new design, how would that journey look like? How does that journey solve any of the existing known problems that you identified during the as is journey mapping? So that becomes your user journey map. And probably around this time, the interaction designer can then start thinking about the information architecture. What are the different blocks of information that our website or web application needs to cater to? How would you need to structure it? What comes first? What comes later? What is more important? Can I do progressive disclosure to show something first, then show this, and then show the more detailed part? You might want to do some analysis. How important is a certain piece of information? How often is a certain task done? Task frequency, analysis on that. You could do an analytics, data analytics. A lot of organizations will capture data analytics about usage of their product, about how often does a user land on a particular page, what buttons do they click, at what point do they leave the journey. So doing analysis of that data, of the data that the users has already, the analytical data that the users have already captured, so that all that analysis work is done before you start your design. And now that you have a fairly good idea about what problems the user faces, first, the problem statement that we are trying to address, the business is trying to solve. Second, what problem the users are facing, and then all the other analysis that I just mentioned, right? User journey mapping, information architecture, data analytics. So once you have done all that analysis, now you are in a more enlightened state. Let's assume that you are not just a user researcher, you are a hybrid designer, or whoever is the other UX designer within your team. Now they have that understanding of, now you should start thinking about your platform. Am I going to do mobile only? Am I going to do desktop and mobile? Is it responsive? Is it native app? You might then start building a low fidelity wireframe. And then a very important step that I would suggest and advise is that before you build the design, or before you even get into high fidelity design, if you have made a low fidelity design, go and test that design with the users again. So while the initial part of the research was about knowing about the user, the latter part would be about how does the user find your proposed design, right? Do that before they actually build it. So try to squeeze in 1 week's time to get that understanding about, and it's very difficult to get the project team to agree to this, because they are now, you have done your 1 month of research work, they are on their on their chariots, as they as you would say घोड़े पे रहते हैं, to start development, right? So always build in at least 1 week of research work before they pick up the design for building it. So that way you can capture whether your understanding of the problem statement was correct, your solution is correctly addressing it. If not, you might just want to spend some time and tweak your design. And then I think it is a standard. You have those typical design demo, sprint demos. So usually, typically, most projects do agile way of working. So I'm sure you might have heard of agile methodology. Basically, they break up the work into smaller chunks, and they will do one chunk of work within 2 weeks sprint, and then every sprint they will deliver something, right? So once as they develop it, after development also you can do a post development testing. Typically this might be picked up by the user testing team, not necessarily by a UX designer, but if you could, that would definitely be a plus point. Any feedback you get post development can again go and inform your future research and future designs that you might be working on. So generally this is how the entire end-to-end process is. I'm sure if there are any other questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. So you were saying something when the audio.
So I was saying that yes, this has been an insightful conversation.
Yeah, I hope.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope you've learned something. I'll tell you one thing, Khushi. I mean, the reason I do these have these conversations is one. When I was at your stage, I did not have these opportunities to engage with people. It was a new industry. It was a new domain. There were not as many people available to share their experiences. So I thought if me sharing this with aspiring designers, makes it much easier, or helps them become a better designer, I would have done my share of work. More than happy to do that.
Definitely, yes.
All right, Khushi. So it was a pleasure chatting with you, having this conversation, Khushi. Hope to connect with you sometime.
Yes.
Maybe in future, and see how that goes.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and best of luck for your future.